TikTok, though, is firing back, saying in part, it's curious that the government of Canada has moved to block TikTok without citing any specific security concern or contacting us with questions, only after similar bans were introduced in the EU and the US. We are always available to meet with our government officials to discuss how we protect the privacy and security of Canadians, but singling out TikTok in this way does nothing to achieve that shared goal. TikTok is owned by ByteDance, a Chinese internet company headquartered in Beijing. Lawmakers in other countries have raised national security concerns about that company sharing data it obtains through the app with China. The feds called today on TikTok as they face demands to call an inquiry on allegations China interfered in past elections. Here's what the Prime Minister said when asked about an inquiry.
You used to call yourself transparent by default. Why are you so resistant to calling such an inquiry, and are you at all open to the idea now of holding a public inquiry into this very important issue for Canadians?
Because we're all concerned and worried about our elections' integrity, and that's why we have put in place mechanisms, why we continue to see hearings on this in parliamentary committee, why we continue to be open and transparent, because yes, openness and transparency is extraordinarily important for our democracies and for active defense of our democracies.
Joining me now to talk about that, Liberal MP Talib Noor Mohammed, Conservative Democratic Reform critic Michael Cooper, and NDP House Leader Peter Julian. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I apologize for my voice. I'm not sick, I promise. I've just lost it. Mr. Noor Mohammed, I wanted to start with you. And just quickly on TikTok, before we move to the substance of whether to have or not to have an inquiry, is this a first step? Is your government considering banning the app across the country?
This is a step that is for government devices. CSC, the Communication Security Establishment, has said that, Canadians should be vigilant in what apps they put on their phones, and whether or not TikTok is on people's personal devices, whether you're a politician, it's on your personal device, that is a personal choice. But for government devices, there has been a level of concern raised, and so this is a proactive measure to make sure that government devices are protected. But at this stage, there is nothing else.
And when you talk about a security concern, as I pointed out in the introduction, other countries have expressed concern that what happens is the data is taken because of the sort of nature of the app and what you agreed to. But the concern from a national security perspective is that it is shared with the Chinese regime. Is that a concern your government has? I
think any time information from a phone is taken by a private enterprise and where the protocols are not sufficient to guarantee the privacy of that information, you have to be concerned. It's not simply about whether it's the Chinese government. I think any time you have situations like this in mobile apps, particularly on government devices, there's reason to be concerned.
Okay, but let me just challenge you for a second, because there's a lot of apps where there are privacy concerns. The concern raised by people in other countries, lawmakers in other countries who are worried about national security, is specific to sharing it with China. You don't have those specific concerns.
I'm not saying that. I am saying that among the many concerns that we should rightly have is where does that data go? If it's a Chinese company and that data could end up in the hands of the Chinese government, that's definitely something to be concerned about.
Okay, I want to move on to the inquiry, and I'll loop your colleagues in a second. Just really quickly to get us started off, Mr. Noor Mohammed, pardon me. The Prime Minister is, as I put there, rebuffing calls for an inquiry. There is concern. There are a lot of questions being asked about the integrity of the past two elections as it relates specifically to allegations of Chinese foreign interference in those elections. Why not shed some major sunlight on this and call an inquiry?
I think the first thing that Canadians should be reassured of is that the elections in 2019 and 2021 were free and fair. And the process that was put in place to make sure that happened was the commission that was set up. It's under the protocol, under the critical election incident panel protocol that was set up with the clerk of the Privy Council, the deputy ministers of Foreign Affairs, of Public Safety, of Justice, so on and so forth. And it is their role to assess whether or not any instances amount to impacting the outcome of the election. And so Canadians need to rest assured that both those elections were handled under that protocol, and in both elections, that threshold, that bar of impact on the outcome of the election was not raised. Now, that's not to say that we should not be concerned about foreign interference. Chinese interference is something that we've known about for quite some time. That's why we put the processes in place after the 2015 election, in advance of the 2019 election. And that's why we need to continue to lean in on making sure that we figure out what more we can do. And the Prime Minister was very clear about giving resources to to ensure that that is the case, we have the Committee of Parliamentarians who are cleared to deal with this. They're going to look at this, and we'll look at the recommendations that come out of this.
Okay, I have some challenges for that, but I want to bring in Mr. Cooper. On the point that Mr. Nur Mohammed makes around the site task force, which was established to raise an alarm bell should the integrity of the election be compromised. That alarm was not sounded. He is correct. The Prime Minister is correct in that. Why do you think an inquiry is still necessary if we know, based on that the outcome of the election was not impacted?
Well, the rapid response mechanism at Global Affairs was monitoring interference targeted at Conservative candidates in the 21 election, and those candidates were kept in the dark. That is a problem. And although no one is disputing that the overall result of the election was in any way compromised, what we have was a campaign, a sophisticated campaign of interference targeted at specific ridings that may have impacted the outcome in those ridings. Whether it's 5, 6, 10 ridings, it's a big deal. And for the Prime Minister to downplay this type of interference by Beijing is unacceptable. And he talks about transparency, but he's been anything but transparent. The Liberals have gutted a motion that I put forward last week for the independent parliamentary law clerk to redact relevant documents, the parliamentary law clerk having a full national security clearance, totally independent, to produce the documents to committee and to have appear before our committee relevant ministers as well as PMO staff. And now, based on the shocking allegations that senior Trudeau staff were briefed by CSIS that a Liberal candidate, now a Liberal MP, had the assistance of Beijing in securing his nomination, and then they turned a blind eye to that, raises all the more reason why we need to hear from the PMO, from the Prime Minister,
right,
and why this Prime Minister and his staff cannot be shielded any longer. They have a lot to answer for.
And I certainly do, and we'll get to those allegations in a second. I understand those concerns, but in what, I mean, specifically, how has the Prime Minister sort of downplayed all of this? He set up that committee. That is the work of this government, right, to sound an alarm. There have been, CSIS does collect the information, does pass it on. If it didn't impact the outcome of the election, why do you assume something nefarious happened?
Well, if it impacted the results in any riding, that is a problem. If candidates were kept in the dark when that interference was happening, that's a problem as well. And the Prime Minister has, up until now, refused to answer basic questions. What we now need to hear from the Prime Minister answer very simply is, was he aware that CSIS had briefed his senior staff that Mr. Dong may be compromised by Beijing, and what did he do about it? Did he turn a blind eye? That's a critical question, because if he did turn a blind eye, it's scandalous. And even more concerning, just on that Global News report, is that this was a classified briefing. And there were at least 2 sources in that Global News story that reported that that information was then leaked to Mr. Dong. If that's the case, not only is that scandalous, it might have crossed the line into criminality.
I just want to explain to our viewers who are watching, the allegation, as you said, first reported by Global News over the weekend, is that a Liberal MP in a riding just near Toronto in Don Valley was involved in these efforts for foreign interference, and that which he categorically denies, I should say today, and that there was some intelligence to that effect that was shared with people around the Prime Minister, and he was warned not to approve his nomination. The Prime Minister was asked that a couple of times today. He said he stood by. This is the statement that you're looking at on the screen from Han Dong himself, in which he denies that. He says he stands by Mr. Dong. I'm paraphrasing here, he was a good candidate. He didn't directly address whether or not he had been briefed, but he did say it's not the role of security officials to offer that kind of warning. Mr. Julian, Mr. Cooper just brought up part of what he put forward to committee last week that would have broadened the scope of the type of people you can call before it and the type of information. The NDP was supportive of the Liberals in that instance. Has your position evolved like Mr. Singh's has to now support an inquiry?
Well, we're the only party that has been calling for an inquiry. The Conservatives have been discreet on this, and the Liberals, of course, Mr. Trudeau, up until now, has refused to put in place a national public inquiry. But the reality is Canadians need answers to these very, very serious allegations. These are allegations of criminal activity. that have basically violated the electoral laws that govern our elections. If the allegations are true, we saw with the former Conservative MP, Dean Del Mastro, he ended up in prison. And these allegations are something that I think all of us need to have answers to. And so Mr. Singh's call yesterday for a national public inquiry, we're hoping that all parties will support that. This is the way of getting answers in a nonpartisan way. Both Conservative and Liberal candidates were apparently involved. Those are the allegations that are before us. We need to make sure in a nonpartisan way through a national public inquiry that we get answers to these important questions.
Would you support Mr. Cooper's call, though, for the law clerk, for example, to get involved in redacting documents so that you have more access to them, and that for certain PMO staffers to be called as well?
We go beyond that, and we will be bringing forward motions this week to that effect. We're very concerned about Liberal Party involvement, Conservative Party involvement. The Conservatives have not come clean on who is actually involved from the Conservative Party. The Liberals have not been willing to put forward the national public inquiry that is required. These are important questions need to be answered, and we go beyond the issue of foreign interference from China. Of course, the 2016 election elected Donald Trump had collusion with the Russian government. We saw the same thing in the Brexit
So are you trying to broaden it out
referendum.
beyond China?
Yes, foreign interference generally, we need to be concerned about. And we need to have, with a public inquiry, the full state of what are the concerns that have been raised about foreign interference in our elections. Canadians need answers to those questions.
I have to leave it there. I wish I had time to ask more questions and get more answers, but certainly we'll be looking towards that committee this week. Thank you very much, Mr. Noor Mohammed, Mr. Cooper, and Mr. Julian. The CORE is calling for a public inquiry into allegations of Chinese election interference. As you heard, there is getting loud.